Hey guys, it turns out this week's topic, our Superman animated movie wish lists, was simply too big for one episode, so I decided to split it in two. Here is part one today, and make sure you come back tomorrow for part two. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to share our Superman animated movie wish lists is the host of Missing Frames, returning guest, Sean Eastridge. Welcome back.
Anthony, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and chat about Superman. So let's do it. Let's dive right in.
I've really been looking forward to this one. This one hasn't been on the list for that long, but I came up with this idea and I felt like coming out of our Supergirl coverage and settling back into Man of Steel territory, this would be a fun re-entry topic. And just to clarify for the audience, Sean and I are not going to be counting down existing Superman animated movies. This is our wish list, movies that don't exist that we would love to see. And as far as ground rules, there aren't many. So as far as the different categories that our picks might fall into, they can be adaptations of comic book stories, adaptations of unproduced screenplays. They can be sequels to existing projects. They can be wholly original ideas. We can really get nuts with it. They don't have to fit into an existing cinematic universe, though they can, or they can be totally standalone, or you can create your own new cinematic universe. So it's really
choose your
wide
own
open.
Cinematic universe.
Yeah. I think we can jump in. The only setup question I have for you, and this may or may not inform your strategy and your picks, we'll see. But I guess my question for you, as far as the original animated movies that we've gotten from Warner Brothers Entertainment over these years, and I know there are even older ones, but this wave really kicked off in 2007 with Superman Doomsday, and we've had so many since then. And I guess I'm curious, what are the ones that have resonated the most with you, either in terms of specific movies or certain kinds of movies?
It's tough with the animated films. You know, I have a lot of affection and love for the animated series. We've talked about it. We talked about Superman, the animated series. We even talked about, you know, through our Supergirl coverage and the Supergirl stories we covered in the animated universe, I kind of sort of fell in love with Justice League, which I hadn't really given a chance before. So I've been watching through that. So I have a lot of love for those animated series, but for some reason, the films I think have always been a struggle for me. And I think there are a couple reasons why. I remember, and Doomsday is one I remember watching early on, and I enjoyed it. I think I have enjoyed all the ones I've seen. It's been kind of like, yeah, that was good. But I think for me, the struggle has been typically it is condensing like a really incredible epic story on the page into 70 to 80 minutes. You know, with Doomsday, I think it was right around that length. They did the entire death and return of Superman. Dark Knight Returns, I remember, was another one. They at least split into two films. But even then, it just feels like there's such incredible stuff that's left on the page. And some of the animation, and this is with all due respect to everyone who's worked on these, some of the animation kind of, it starts to look a little bit samey to me. I know there are budget restrictions, and I know that can account for some of that. But I think for me, it feels a lot more like maybe made for TV than I would want some of these adaptations to feel. I'm a big animation fan. I adore like the works of Hayao Miyazaki or some of my all-time favorites. So I'm really, really, when I look at animation, I want to see something on that level. And I understand that is maybe a bit unreasonable to ask, but it's made my relationship with these films a little kind of like iffy, where I have seen a couple, but it's not necessarily something where I'm like, great, I'm going to rush out and watch everyone. And I would be very curious to hear, I know you've been posting about a particular one recently, but I would love to hear what your picks are, if there are any I should definitely check out, just based on knowing that and my perception.
Yeah, right on. No, I appreciate getting your perspective on that. I would say for myself, and this has come up over the years anytime we've broached the subject, but I think for me with these animated movies specifically, the sweet spot for me is an adaptation of a comic book storyline in the style of the original artist and or with the participation of the original writer. That's kind of the sweet spot. So the ones that I really hold up, New Frontier, and I know New Frontier had to cut out a lot, but Darwin Cook was involved. And I still maintain that the cuts that were made to fit that runtime worked. So it's a different beast, but it still worked. And then beyond that, Superman, Batman, Public Enemies, and then Apocalypse, which we've just been talking and posting about. And I would also cite Under the Red Hood. That was another one that really stood out to me. And you had Judd Winnick there who was adapting it himself. So I think that's the recipe for me that I tend to gravitate towards. And it's one of those things. I know it's ironic for me to be saying this coming off of the Supergirl movie, which was an adaptation of a comic book storyline, but that was an exception. That's normally not the case. And so I just look at these animated movies as an opportunity to adapt comic book storylines that doesn't typically exist when we're talking about other films and TV shows, live action or otherwise. And obviously, so many of these shows and films, of course, they borrow elements from the comics. But as far as a true adaptation, I feel like these animated films are a great vehicle for it that you don't otherwise get. So that's not informing all of my picks here, but if there's a theme, it's probably that.
Yeah, and you get the more outlandish stuff too, stuff that you don't have the capability to show in live action. I mean, we can pretty much, almost, we got Avengers Endgame. So it's kind of like the sky is the limit. But even with the sky being the limit, there are stories that it's kind of like, can we fit that into this more grounded story we're telling, this more grounded universe we're trying to come up with? Things like that. I think the animation allows for that level of creativity. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think when it's someone like Darwin Cook and he's involved directly, his animation style, I love that. I think for me, a lot of the animated films start to look a little samey. And I want to see, and with my picks, I think each story that I have picked, I'm kind of picking it with the mindset of, I would love for that art style to be adapted directly.
Exactly. And not to beat up on the lines of films that we've gotten, but we were in a mode for a long time where there were a bunch of films that all existed within the same cinematic universe. They were borrowing from the New 52 in terms of storyline and aesthetic to a degree at least. And then that gave way to the Tomorrowverse line of films. But spoiler alert, that ended up being an extension of the cinematic universe that came before. And within those two, arguably one lines, there were adaptations of comic book stories. That's where we got another attempt at the death and return of Superman. And I love those movies. We also got an adaptation of Hush and Long Halloween. And I enjoyed them, yet they were still...
Did you enjoy Killing Joke?
The back half of it.
The part that was actually in the story?
I appreciated what they were trying to do with that Barbara Gordon prologue that they added. I think the intention was good. It was the execution that didn't work. But, that was its own, that was a standalone thing. But when we do get these adaptations that are part of these cinematic animated movie universes, they're fine to me, but they still have to fit within those worlds. And I like the death and return of Superman is a perfect example where on the one hand, it was really cool. We got to see Doomsday take down the better version of the Justice League, as much as, of course, we love that 90s iteration. But it was cool to see him take on Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Lantern. But then when you get to Reign, and I interviewed Tim Sheridan about it, who wrote the screenplay, did a fantastic job, but it still had to fit. So you couldn't get the destruction of Coast City and Mongol and all that. And so I say to myself, well, if those two movies didn't have to fit within that line, and they could have been truly standalone, only connected to each other. And they could have emulated the art of Dan Jurgens. And we could have gotten Mongol and Warworld and the destruction of Coast City and all of that. That would have been my preference. So that's, in my heart of hearts, what I ultimately always long for.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and that's what's fun about making these wish lists too, is to kind of think about it without the constraints of schedule, budget, all of those things. It can be like, you know what? I want this to be a trilogy. I want it to be a little series. I want it to be something where you can take all the best pieces of the story, because I think you do, again, it's perfectly understandable, but it's hard when you're taking these expansive, incredible worlds. And usually these are stories that are part of a long running series with a lot of lore and characters that have been set up, and you're condensing it down to feature length, that's where it starts to get a little bit difficult. So kudos to like you said, it takes a lot of effort, and these guys, they understand what they're doing. Like, they understand that it is, and it's heartbreaking for them too, like to be like, we just had to, at that point, make some tough cuts and remove this piece and that piece, but we had to get it down to 80 minutes, like that kind of stuff. I empathize with that.
100%. It's like, yeah, if I were a screenwriter and I were tasked with adapting any part of the Death and Return of Superman, of course I would go
movie.
Yeah. And they're told you have one movie, or, these elements are off the table. It's like, okay. So it's like, okay, how do we approach it? The last thing I'll say is that, hand in hand with what I've been saying, I don't personally need a shared cinematic universe with these animated films, because we get them in so many other places. We've had the DCEU and now the DCU in live action film. We've had the Arrowverse on television. We had the DCAU network of animated shows. So I guess that's the other reason why, when it comes to these animated movies, it's like, they don't need to tie into each other. Like, let's just be standalone and get a little bit more creative and pull from the comics. And I still don't think getting a little bit deeper with the comic adaptations would be alienating to people. And on that note, well, I guess I do have some fairly specific picks here, but at the same time, I was trying to keep in mind viability and marketability of these things. So as specific as some of them get.
Okay, so there is some business stuff happening. You are thinking with your producer cap on.
Yeah, to some degree or another, I look at these picks and I'm like, yeah, I think there's a way to sell this. I think there's a way to make this presentable to the public, even if they don't have the background in it, whether it's the title or something else. So we'll see as this unfolds. But I'm excited to compare lists here. Now, I did rank mine. This doesn't need to be etched in stone here, but we'll essentially go through our list of 10. We'll alternate. If one entry comes up on both of our lists, we'll talk about it together at the same time. And I guess without further ado, let's get into it. As guest, I would love to have you go first. So what's your first wish list item here?
Well, I'm already afraid I may have grabbed one that we both have. So maybe this will work out. But I think if I were to, and I didn't rank it, but if it was, Sean, you can only pick one story to adapt. That would be a very, very tough ask. But if it has to be an adaptation of a comic book. It has to be a graphic novel or a comic book story. Which one? And I would have to go with, I'd probably have to go with For All Seasons. And it would need to be in the Tim Sale style. And even with those beautiful watercolors, like getting that kind of animation down to the character designs. I love, and look, there has been no shortage of Superman origin stories out there in the world. I think the last thing we really need right now is maybe another origin story, but I love For All Seasons so much. If I had to pick one Superman story to call my favorite, it would be this one. And I think the visual of the different seasons, the fact that it's self-contained, the fact that you don't, like you said, there's no lore you have to follow. There's no, it's going to connect to a sequel. It is a self-contained emotional story that follows Clark on a singular journey. And you might have to, in the adaptation process, lose some of the really cool stuff that we get from issue to issue, like the different narrators. Maybe you could adapt that, but it might not work if you're doing a film. It would work if you did 4 episodes of like an HBO Max series or something like that. But if we're talking about a singular film, you might have to lose a couple creative ideas. But I think visually, emotionally, I love the Smallville stuff. And I just love that as a here's how Superman started story. And that would probably be the one story I would choose to adapt if I had to pick one.
It's a slam dunk. And we did have a couple of patrons who suggested the same. On the note of the narration, because this comes up anytime we're talking about Loeb's work being adapted. And in every instance that I could think of, we've had to lose it. So not to piggyback on your pick, but I'm going to say no. If we do this, I want that narration. God damn it. For once, sir. Give me that Loeb narration. All that being said, can I shock you? It's not on my list.
Wow. But now, is it not on your list because, and I know you love For All Seasons, but is it not on your list because you had a feeling this was one that a lot of people would put on their list?
Number one, yes, there was that. But also, actually circling back to something you were saying a moment ago, I feel like we've seen origin stories in many forms, and so I just kind of wanted to push past that. Those were the two main reasons. But otherwise, yeah, no, of course, for all the reasons that you said, it would really be beautiful to see that, and I think could be a really lovely tribute to Tim Sale. And you think about the kind of score that you could get, right? That's the one component, that and a vocal performance that you don't have when you're reading it on the page. So you think about what this would sound like, and could be really, really beautiful. So no objections from me. But no, that's not, believe it or not, that's not officially on my list.
Incredible. Yeah, and I just, there's a humility to Clark in that story that, and Clark and Superman, he is a humble character in general, and I think that's what makes him so special. But I think, it's funny. I remember when I first read For All Seasons being a little like, not put off, but a little kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this. Just the look of Superman. Like, he is so giant and bulky is almost how I would describe him. But I think when you contrast that with just his meekness and kindness in that story in particular, there's something about that gentleness that I think it would be like, yes, this is how I see Superman. This is how I want the world to see Superman. And some of my favorite Superman moments are in that story. And we've seen them adapted. The thanks, my mom made it for me. We saw in Superman and Lois. I think my favorite panel of any Superman story, and again, this is, there's steep competition, but when he finds his dog after the flood in Smallville, and they're like, "Where's Shelby? Where's Shelby?" And Shelby's gone. We're sorry. And he hears Shelby barking, and there's the panel of him on the little island with Shelby, and she's licking his face. That, to me, I'm like, that's Superman. And moments like that, I'm like, I'm with you. I'm like, we don't need another origin, but I just love this take so much. And I love, and this is where I appreciate you with your producer hat going like, no, we are having the narration in there, because I think what also helps is having those perspectives, Jonathan and Lex and like you get all, and Lois, like you get all the different examinations of this character through their eyes, through their unique perspectives. And it makes for a really special story that I think I can forgive it being an origin, because we have a little bit more perspective in it, aside from he shows up and he's Superman. And so, yeah, I think that would be my top pick.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, it's so heartwarming and emotionally resonant. It's certainly my favorite emotional telling of Superman's origin. And I guess, keeping my producer's hat on, the last thing I'll say is that, and this is something that I think will come up in other entries that I'm going to share, at least from my part, is that I would really want it to be true to the comic. I feel like the instinct would be, you got to fight a big monster at the end or something. And it's like, no, keep it small, keep it grounded, keep it personal. And I think audiences, even beyond the typical comic book fans, I think it would be refreshing to see a story that really drills down on, okay, who is this guy? How do the people around him see him? From his friends and family to his enemy, like Lex, how do they see him? How does he respond? Why does he do this? I really think there would be something refreshing about that. So if they could honor that core of the comic, I'm all for it.
For sure. We're fighting the battles to make sure this ends up in Smallville and that it's no monster, it's just a flood. Because again, there's also I don't think it's explicitly stated, but there's the hint that the town knows who he is and they rally around him. Mm-hmm. It's like their secret. And they're like, he's our son. Kind of like you hear about certain celebrities who live in small towns and they talk about like, the people, like they're really cool. And they actually, I think Shelley Duvall was one that I'm thinking of. She recently passed away, but she did an interview. And I remember the journalist went around and interviewed people in the town, and they were basically like standoffish towards them. Like basically like, you better not spin this story the wrong way, because we love that woman and we're here to protect her. And there's that vibe in Smallville of they kind of, they aren't outright saying it, but they kind of know. And I loved, again, speaking of the character's humility, that humbleness, his need to retreat when Lex defeats him in this very like horrifying kind of way. I loved that he has to go back home and retreat and rediscover who he is. I think that's part of why I love that story so much. Is it's small on the scale that we're used to in big budget superhero movies, but emotionally it just works so well for me as the climax of that story.
Yeah. And obviously it spans all 4 seasons, but I could see it being kind of a Christmas time release.
Yeah.
Falling in that time frame, I think would be beautiful. So yes,
for sure.
I co-sign on that. Okay. My first pick. And by the way, audience, before I even start listing them off, you know me well enough. You've been listening to these episodes. You might hit pause for a second, make your own list of what you think I'm going to say, and then see at the end how you did. So my first pick is an adaptation of the 2001 crossover event, Our Worlds at War, the DC Universe versus Imperiex. Have you read this?
Pitch me on this, because that has been on my to-read list for so long.
So this is the last big storyline of the Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly era of the comics. Both of them would continue on their respective titles for a little while longer, but this was the last big storyline, and it pits the heroes of the DC Universe against this cosmic force, Imperiex, that looks to wipe everything out and start the universe anew. And there's a lot of great dynamics to play here. This is when Lex is president, and he's been fed information of what's going to happen from his daughter, Lena, who's now grown and has been reprogrammed by Brainiac 13. So he's making some shrewd choices, but then it seems like he kind of knew what was going to happen before it happened. He's made this alliance with Darkseid. There's the devastation of Kansas. Ma and Pa Kent go missing, so that's obviously an emotional moment for Clark. There's a key point where Lois's father, General Sam Lane, is in dire need of help, and Lois is calling out to Clark. And I mean, I don't want to spoil too much of this, but
sure,
Clark doesn't necessarily get there in time. Like, there's really fascinating pieces, but more than anything, and this so stood out when we revisited this for the show last year, I think the comic did a great job of leaning into the war motif and really showing the relentless pace of the battles and the toll it was taking on Clark. There's an issue of Joe Kelly's action in particular where you really see how disoriented this guy is. Like, he is spent and he's really been put through the ringer. And so I think if an animated movie could really lean into that war theme and show the toll that it's taking, I think it would really work.
I love that. And I love, because so many people, the big complaint, he's the Boy Scout, he's perfect. You don't see, he doesn't get emotional, blah, blah, blah. But you have him in that state, in that exhausted state, with such a relentless foe, with such a relentless environment and all these crazy things happening. That could be really, really cool and really exciting. And I've been wanting to read that one that omnibus has been on my wish list for so long now.
Yeah, it's a really fun ride. And it's one of those things, as really the crescendo of the Loeb Kelly era, it works great, but I think it could work just as well in isolation. I don't think there's so much backstory that an audience would need to know. Not unlike what I was saying with For All Seasons, I guess my only real requirement is that the people making this would truly recognize what it's about, because I feel like the instinct might be, oh yeah, it's a monster attacks and the heroes fight, and oh, does it have to be Imperiex? Who's that? Like, can it be Darkseid? And
Right.
That's not what this story is. And look, I fully admit Imperiex is not the most fleshed out 3-dimensional character, but he's not meant to be. It's more of this force. And so not to belabor the point, but if the makers of this, should it ever come to pass, really recognize the war theme and lean into it, that's what I think would make this work. And the other thing too is, in addition to the main Superman titles, it did also cross over with a number of other DC titles and specials and things like that. This is one of those things, were it a series, then yeah, I think you could get into the Young Justice side quest and things like that. For a film, I think there's a lot that can kind of fall away. And even when we did our episode, we really primarily focused on the mainline super titles, and you get the complete story there. So, I think there are ways to do this where it's a duology or a trilogy or a series, but I think there's also a way that you can do it in a really streamlined manner in one film and really get the main thrust of it. So Our Worlds at War, man, would I love to see it. And yes, to your point, I'm very happy that it's being collected in omnibus form. I have the first one. I'm eagerly awaiting the second. Very happy to see that.
Yeah, I will be getting that, and I'm excited to dive in when I do.
Planning to check out San Diego Comic-Con this summer? Come join Alex Marcus and Amanda Rivas of the Pop Break Podcasting Network for a family-friendly bracket-style debate panel on the best pop culture vacation destinations. Alex, Amanda, and their all-star panel of podcasters and cosplayers debate the amenities, tourist sites, and best street food from your favorite pop culture locales. Would you rather have a romantic weekend getaway on Paradise Island, a ski trip at the Fortress of Solitude, an architectural tour through downtown Wakanda? Come join in on the fun and find out what the panel has to say. The Pop Break presents the best pop culture vacation destinations will be held on Sunday, July 26th at 1 p.m. at the Neil Morgan Auditorium of the San Diego Central Library. Event is restricted to authorized San Diego Comic-Con badge holders. See you there. It's been over a decade since my comic shop closed, but if there's one place where I feel the same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, the Garden State's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Moose is also home to our main man, Justin DeVoe, who is taking you inside his world of collecting and cosplay on his YouTube channel, Tannelier's Basement. Subscribe today. This podcast is sponsored in part by Rick Reason. No product pitch this time, no big sales campaign. Just a comic fan helping support a show he genuinely enjoys. Rick believes comics matter because stories matter, especially ones about hope, grief, second chances, and trying to be better than you were yesterday. Follow Rick Reason on Facebook for comics, humor, life reflections, and the occasional third shift existential crisis.
We're back, baby.
Who's back?
The Legion of Superheroes is back. It's taken a while, but DC's oldest super team is back.
Everything's different, but everything's the same. Does that make sense?
Kinda.
It's going to take a lot of work to bring fans up to speed and let them know all about the Legion.
That's what the Long Live the Legion podcast is for. Every episode, we break down the characters, the stories, and the different versions of the team.
So whether this is your first time reading the Legion,
Or you've been reading them for a while.
check out the Long Live the Legion podcast, hosted by us, Jim.
And Jay, we'll help you get to know the team a little bit better.
All right, so we've each done our first pick. So you're number 9. What's next on your list?
Oh boy, I'm looking at my list and I'm gonna pick blind. You know what? Just going into that kind of war theme where Superman is sort of like out of his element and maybe backs against the wall a little bit, I'm gonna go with the War World Saga.
Good man.
Philip Kennedy Johnson. He has become a friend of mine, so I'm a little biased. But I read this before I became friends with him. So also purely as a fan, I loved this story. And I remember seeing it on the shelf when it was coming out and just kind of being, we were in the midst, I think, of the Snyderverse. And I saw Superman as a gladiator. And I'm like, I don't want to see Superman as a gladiator. I want to see him just being Superman. Put him in that colorful, bright suit. So I kind of avoided it. And then as I was preparing for my Celebrating Superman series last year and diving into a bunch of stories that I hadn't read before, the War World just kept popping up on all these lists of you got to read it, you got to read it. So I finally dove in and I just absolutely loved it. And one of the things it does that I think would immediately attract people is you kind of have not a depowered Superman, but he is weaker. So he is out of his element already in that his powers are not operating at full capacity, but it's a rescue mission that you think, all right, this is going to go really, really well. And it does not. It is a scenario in which Superman and his team are pretty much completely defeated and made prisoners. And it's so good and so exciting. And I love the way Philip kind of takes you on that journey and shows you it's not really about the powers. It's about who this guy is, the way he kind of rallies these War World prisoners and kind of gets them up and running and gets them to fight back. I just love that story and I love the characters. And then I just think in general to see Superman in a scenario where you're kind of like, I don't know, how is he going to get out of this? I remember reading through it and just couldn't wait to get to the next issue. I love the art. There's so many artists that worked on this, but I think Riccardo Federici is probably, if I had to pick one, it's you can only pick one artist whose style you want to mimic. I would probably say, let's do it in that style. Just semi-realistic, but also has this kind of, I don't know, it's almost historical. The way he draws things is it's etched on a wall in a way. And it's realistic enough, but it's also got that kind of legendary vibe. And that fits the story so, so well. So I would love to see that. I don't know if I think you could do it in a single feature. You would have to focus exclusively on the war world stuff and not so much the like what's going on at home. You'd literally have to be like Superman's going to go off. He says goodbye to Lois and John, and then he goes off with the team, and you really focus on the war world stuff. But I think it's exciting. I think it would be cool for people who don't know this character as well, who are maybe, I tell people who are kind of like, Superman, he can, nothing's a problem for him. He gets through everything without a struggle. I'd be like, well, check this out. You might get a kick out of this. So I think I would put that pretty high on my list too.
That's a great pick. That was another one that some patrons cited. That's only not on my list because there's something else I have that is very similar. But when we get there, I'll talk about how there might actually be a way to marry the two of them. But okay. I co-sign on everything you're saying. And I say this every time the War World saga comes up. It's like, yes, plot-wise, you have him in the arena battling. But ultimately, this story, like you said, about rallying the people, it's this battle for the soul of these enslaved people. And that spiritual component, not in a religious sense, but that spiritual sense of the spirit of these people needs to be renewed, needs to be inspired. Yeah. It's so good. And the other thing too is I think a lot of times when we, or at least I think about these adaptations, you know, a lot of what I'm thinking about is older stories. And so I think picking something that's relatively fresh and current is great and a wonderful way to say like, hey, yes, there have been all these classic stories and there's a lot to mine there, but there's also really cool stuff that's happening of the moment. And let's not neglect that either. So yeah, I think that would be a great one.
That's my thing too. That's something I struggle with. And I think because of the excitement around James Gunn's film, it gave me an excuse to just be like, you know what, let me just dive right into everything. And things like the War World saga that I hadn't picked up before, it was like, well, I might as well try it. I haven't read it. I can only reread the same like top 10 Superman stories so many times. And I think like War World is very quickly earning that kind of classic Superman story status. And I think people, even as time goes on, people will only appreciate it and love it more and more. But it's a great and exciting story. It's different. It's, you know, it's not on Earth. We're on a completely different planet. And it's just like the animation and the style and the design of this planet, the aliens and the weapons and just the feel of it, I think is so against the grain for what you might expect from a Superman story. But at its core, it's still so very much Superman that you're kind of pleasing both audiences.
Absolutely. By the way, audience, we will be revisiting the entire Philip Kennedy Johnson era of Superman, probably early next year once Book of L is all wrapped up and collected, and we'll go back and we'll look at the whole thing because I'm excited to read it all from start to finish. And I have not yet read any of Book of L, so I'm excited to get into that.
I know I'm still a little depressed that he's jumped ship and is hanging out at Marvel, though I'm very, very excited for Midnight Spider-Man. And of course, Infernal Hulk has been amazing.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he's at least getting the opportunity to finish out the Book of L and complete that story.
Exactly.
All right, so the next one on my list. So this was sort of the product of a couple of different instincts that I had. So I wanted representation for the Legion and Superboy. And hand in hand with that, I also wanted to honor the 2006 to 2008 Legion of Superheroes animated series. Have you ever watched that?
No, I haven't.
So good. And so
the Legion is such a blind spot. It's such a blind spot.
What I can say is that you can just dive into that series and you don't need to be an expert in the lore. I think they really did a nice job of making it accessible. And it's one of those things you talk about under the radar stuff. It's like the people who know it know it.
Yes.
But there are so many people who aren't even aware of it or know about it, but haven't gotten to it yet. And to my knowledge, I don't believe it's streaming anywhere currently. So accessibility is a little bit of a barrier. So this is really under the radar, but they did such a great job. It only ran 2 seasons. And originally it was meant to be Superboy and the Legion, but for various legal reasons, they weren't allowed to call him that. So he was young Superman. So the Legion recruited a young Superman right on the cusp of going to Metropolis and making his debut. And that's the first season. And then in the second season, they recruited an older version of Superman. It was like 5 years down the road. So we very quickly kind of moved away from a Superboy and the Legion feel. And again, not to spoil anything, no huge cliffhangers at the end of the series, yet there is a hint of the Prime Brainiac still being out there. So there's a little bit of unfinished business.
Okay.
But my pitch is this. Because I wanted to honor Superboy, the Legion, and that animated series. But I was also thinking that the Jeff Johns, Gary Frank storyline, Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, would be ripe for an adaptation. I think the themes there are so powerful and sadly timely. But this whole idea of Superman's symbol and history and legend being usurped, corrupted by this human first movement. And the Legion is on the ropes and they bring Superman in and he's got to recall his history with them. You know, there's a great moment early on where one of Brainy's probes sort of unlocks something in Superman. He gets this flood of memories coming back. And so I think my ultimate pitch is Superman and the Legion of Superheroes adapted in the style and continuity and with the vocal performers of the Legion of Superheroes animated series to kind of marry those two things. And what I would really love is a generous helping of Superboy flashbacks throughout this story. And I think that device of his memories, and why doesn't he remember at the start of the movie? I don't know. That could be a plot point, but
it's fine.
I think that
what? Project Hail Mary just did this. Let's, this is going to put Ryan Gosling in the movie. We're making $600 million, $700 million. I'm sold.
There you go. But I think that device of the memories being unlocked, whether it's an extended sequence in that moment or we sprinkle them in, which would be my preference throughout the movie. I would love to see flashes to Clark as Superboy in Smallville, Clark as Superboy with the Legion as a youngster, while we have Superman dealing with this current crisis facing the Legion. So an adaptation of that Jeff Johns, Gary Frank storyline, but in the mode of that Legion animated series. And I think it would also then serve as a really fitting coda and tribute to that Legion show. So
I was going to say, it sounds like this is kind of like a spiritual sequel and really giving you and fans that potential conclusion they didn't get from the series itself.
Yeah. So that's what I would like to see. And I definitely recommend that Legion show. It was really a delight to finally not discover it, but finally dive into it, and well worth a watch. And the only other time I believe where Imperiex has been adapted, they did Imperiex in that animated series. It was a different take, but
you should have led with that. I would have greenlit it immediately.
Yeah. So and I guess the other thing too is, maybe now this is throwing too many ingredients into the mix, but when we do get those Superboy flashbacks, to whatever extent they could pull from what Mark Waid has been doing in the pages of Action Comics currently, I think that would go a long way. I think one of the things that would be important to me is it's awesome that in the comics now, well, it's so funny to me that now I say it's awesome. A few years ago, it would have been like, what is this? He's Superboy. For me now, it's awesome that Clark has a history as Superboy. But I think unless and until it's reflected in other media, I don't know how much it will really cement in the wider public consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, with the James Gunn film, it's like, oh yeah, when he was in his bedroom back on the farm, it's like, oh, it would have been cool if you saw a Legion ring or you saw something. Like, work this in here, because it wouldn't contradict or undermine anything that's going on currently. It's like, let's get that back out there. So I think that's my sort of hidden agenda with this, is like, let's get this idea of Clark as Superboy back out there in a bigger way.
Yeah. And I think, like, because I think the lore of the DCU, when you said that, I was like, oh, that would have been cool. And then I'm remembering, like, Superman revealed himself to the world 3 years ago. And I'm like, oh yeah. And again, I think I've found myself appreciating Superboy more as I've dived into these comics and looked at all the different interpretations and learned to, like, love that version. Cause I am a fan. We discussed it. I'm a fan of the, like, he debuts in Metropolis. Lois names him. If he was Superboy, why does no one know? Like, think, hey, this Superman guy, that he looks and sounds a lot like that Superboy kid. But all that said, the Legion and Superboy is so beloved by fans, and almost every conversation I have with a Superman fan, inevitably it's, why haven't Sean? You need to start reading this. You need to watch this. You need to, all of that stuff and the passion for it. And I've read stories, bits and pieces here and there. I haven't read the Jeff Johns and Gary Frank one, but, like, I think I like the idea of maybe Superman, the Legion has to kind of pull him back a little bit and remind him who he is. And through that process with the flashbacks, we kind of get a nice little reminder of what makes this guy so special in the first place.
Yeah. I think it could work really nice. It's funny because I feel like one of the big reasons why I've been more okay with Clark as Superboy is because Mark Waid has promised me when I interviewed him, he's got this plan for why Clark being Superman, or why Clark being Superboy wouldn't ultimately undermine his debut as Superman. And I'm really pinning a lot on that. And I have faith, but there's a part of me that's like, oh no, like, watch a couple of years from now, when it all plays out, I'll be here. I'll be like, oh, God damn it. It didn't work.
It's going to be, well, it's going to be like, and then this universe altering event that wiped everyone's memory. And
yeah, exactly.
The infamous comic book explanation for why nobody remembers this or that, or we need to soft reboot.
So, yeah, so I'm a little, I'm always a little wary here because I feel like I'm so optimistic. We'll see when it actually plays out, but I continue to have faith. So that's my number 9. So your number 8. What's next that you want to share with us?
I think if we're talking about something more modern, something in the past few years, and let's say you cross off origin stories. You say, Sean, you can't adapt an origin story, but you can only adapt one Superman story that really for you epitomizes who this character is. And it's it has to be a comic book. It has to be a graphic novel. I think, and I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but personally, Up in the Sky by Tom King and Andy Kubert is a recent addition to my absolute favorite Superman stories. I love the idea of Superman has to go off into space to find this one little girl. Is this little girl worth you being away from Earth for however long you're going to be away? What are the consequences of that? But also just this cosmic journey through all these different episodic, colorful, different scenarios. I really love that. But there was so much about that story for me that kind of represents what makes Superman so special. And it kind of captures, like, it sort of does the Silver Agey stuff where he gets in a boxing match with an alien and like all these kind of ridiculous things. He's in a waiting room that's like the DMV to do a long distance call with Lois back home. All of these different things that sort of summarize this character in a way that we hadn't seen before. And people who aren't already fans of the comic, haven't seen, general fans, I think it presents some really fresh ideas, and I find it so moving, and I really would like to see that. And my only hesitation is the same thing with For All Seasons, which is not a narration thing, but the 12 issues, or the 12 issues that it ended up being when they reprinted it outside of the exclusive Walmart comic books that they released it in initially. It's so episodic. Each issue is very much kind of like, it's all part of the overarching story, but they all kind of stand alone. So you could still do this sort of like, oh, it's all these kind of wacky adventures to get to this girl, but it might be difficult narratively to make that feel smooth from beginning to end.
I hear you. It reminds me, as you're saying it does remind me of All-Star Superman, which too, you did have your overall arc for the character, but it was largely episodic, and you had your Bizarro 2-parter, and you had your Jimmy as Doomsday issue, and your Lois as Superwoman issue. I think the degree to which that animated film was able to thread the needle, a little debatable. That not my favorite of all the adaptations, but I think its heart was in the right place. So yeah, I think that could be a challenge, but I think it's doable. I'm on board with that. You know who you lost though with that pick? Michael Bailey. Our friend in podcasting. He's shaking his head. He's like, no.
I didn't know he wasn't a big fan of that.
I only feel comfortable saying this because he's posted about this publicly. So I don't think I'm talking out of school here. I'm open to it. You know, it's funny. I guess I'm using this episode also as an opportunity to plan out future coverage, because I did an episode years ago now on Up in the Sky and Woman of Tomorrow. And of course, more recently, we went back, we did a dedicated standalone Woman of Tomorrow discussion. And now I'm saying maybe I'll take another look at Up in the Sky, because I got the deluxe edition hardcover and I do remember it fondly. So maybe that's worth another look. So that's not on my list, but I think you're onto something.
I was going to say, and I know you're also like, you're a fan of Tom King, but there are people who are kind of like, Tom King is the beginning and the end of comic books right now. And I think Tom himself would chuckle and be like, that's dumb. That's stupid. But I understand it, and I love him as a writer, and I haven't loved everything he's written, but I certainly would put him as one of the top guys working right now. And I just remember, I was introduced to him through The Vision. I read The Vision when it was coming out and was just so blown away by it, and read Batman, and hadn't really, like, he'd done so much dark stuff. Like the stuff he'd done was like dark and psychological and more twisted. And I remember kind of hearing about, oh, Superman, I don't know, is that like a deconstruction of the character? Is he kind of like, doing his whole bit where it's sort of like, let me just tear this and like sort of deconstruct. And then it just ended up being like a real celebration and embrace of what made Superman great. And I was so pleasantly surprised. And I just, there's so much stuff I love. There's one episode that I would probably, my screenwriter / producer brain would be like, cut that episode. That's got to go. But there's a whole thing where I think there's an alien that gives its own life to save Superman. It's reading Superman's thoughts and sees like his memories and what he means to people and the hope he brings. And this alien who has a family decides to sacrifice himself and give his life to save Superman's because he realizes this guy is more important than me. And then Superman has to go and talk to that guy's family after it's like a very powerful scene. And it's like, that would be the thing that they say, kill your darlings. That's the darling that would break my heart to kill. But with the episodic nature of the story that works so beautifully in comic book form, that's one of those that I could see myself being like, it just has to go because unless it was an episodic 12-part series, all the episodes are going in. But if I'm being tough and trying to narrow it down to the essentials, that might have to go.
No, that's a good pick. And look, obviously with his Woman of Tomorrow being the basis for the Supergirl film, it's like, yeah, it actually might make sense, Warner Brothers, capitalize on this.
Yes.
And I do think an animated vehicle would be appropriate for that. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. Okay, so my next one is not an adaptation. It's an original idea, and the idea itself is relatively underdeveloped. I don't have all of this worked out. It's more the setting, the aesthetic, the vibe. I would love to see a Superman animated film set in the golden age of the character.
Oh, I'm going to tell you right now, this is on my list, just a golden age Superman. So technically this is an overlap, and I love where you're going.
Yeah, a golden age story, stripped down, his original look. I mean, this is the Superman who grew up in the orphanage in that first year of continuity before we had the insertion of the Kens. And I just think there's opportunity. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking of the Fleischer animated shorts. I'm thinking about that style, that gorgeous animation that still holds up, is so dynamic even today, so action-packed. What I would want to do is update it in the sense of delving more into the personal side of the characters. Those shorts obviously were not built for that. I wouldn't expect them to be. But I think that's where there's an opportunity to really be in that time period, that setting, that aesthetic, the scaled down powers, but now really kind of flesh out the characters. And the basics of the story that I guess I had in my mind, I wouldn't go big with this. I would do an intergang story, and I would have Clark, the reporter, really being the driver. And if we're thinking about a mode for Clark, I want like season 1 Adventures of Superman, George Reeves. Like this guy, he'll knock your heads together, and he's not putting up with any guff. So that's kind of what I want, like this noirish late 30s, early 40s setting for the character. And this is where I'm a little bit torn. Now, I know what my answer is, because there's a part of me that's like, really keep it, even cast wise, like really keep it stripped down to just the characters who were there back in the day. But then I say to myself, no, like it would be interesting to see a late 30s, early 40s spin on Bibbo Babowski, for example. Maybe he's just gotten out of the Navy and he's trying to get his boxing career going. And then Intergang, he gets swept up in Intergang because they're trying to fix fights or something, and he's got to stand up for himself. Like, I think there are a lot of opportunities here. So a golden age set story. And like I said, for me, I think Clark investigating Intergang is the foundation. And look, they can create a robot or something. We'll have our action set pieces, but that's what I would love to see.
Yeah, I literally, my note is Golden Age Superman in the Max Fleischer style.
Yes.
So literally, like, I am 100% on board with this. And to exactly your point, the only thing I would say is like, let's get a little bit into this character. Let's dive a little bit more into his psychology. But I'm genuinely shocked. The Max Fleischer, it's held in such high regard. It has had so much influence. And it just feels like, I don't know that there's much animated content, DC or otherwise, that has matched it in terms of look and that feel. It just feels like an easy win to me. And it's genuinely shocking that Warner Brothers, DC has not taken advantage of that. We've seen little teases of, like, again, Superman and Lois, I'll sing its praises all day long, but seeing the Fleischer costume in live action was wonderful. But I want to see, like, let's rotoscope. Let's do that. Like, let's go back to those basics. And, you know, we're at the point where technology is advanced enough that it probably won't cost as much as it did Paramount back in the day. So let's do it. Like, let's do a variation of that. Let's have that style and tell that story, and to update the storytelling technique to the 21st century with that quality of storytelling, but with that animation that still feels so ahead of its time. It's great. And it's such a great way to honor the roots of that character, because I think unless you're like super nerdy and reading this stuff, the general public doesn't know a lot about that interpretation of the character. I think people would be kind of surprised, like, oh, he doesn't fly, but he doesn't like do this, or he's gruffer and a little bit more like he'll slap people around a little bit more. And I love that. And of course, like the 20s, 30s, that era, so beautiful. The vibe is so wonderful for that character. It just on so many levels feels like something that should exist already. We should have this animated movie already. And I'm genuinely shocked we don't.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things, building off of what you were saying, it's like, yeah, this is your opportunity to really give us the champion of the oppressed Superman. And really lean into that, because it's like, yeah, when you look at the history of the character, debuts in 38, it's not all that long before we're in World War II territory. And now the character needs to become the symbol of America and this piece of propaganda. And then after that, we're segueing into the Silver Age and things get wacky and sci-fi, and we love all of it. But there's something really beautiful and pure about that original intent Superman, who's knocking down tenements on behalf of the people. That would be really, really great to explore.
Yeah.
I've been a big fan of the Batman Caped Crusader series. And what's cool there, once again, set in this bygone era, and it's so stripped down. It's like the Batcave is Bruce in a room with a phone and a blackboard. And it's like, this is great. Like,
yes,
we love all the trappings, all the gadgets. It's so fun. But there's also something really interesting. Well, it's like, okay, let's take that away. And now it's really about his mind, his wits, the alliances he can form. I think it just allows you to amplify those aspects. So I think there's so much potential here. The only other specific thing that I have that I wanted to say is Perry White's got to be mayor. He's got to be coming to the end of his mayoral term, and he's on the way out. He's thinking about what he's going to do next, and then he's got this inner gang problem to deal with before it all ends. So that's the other piece that I want to see.
So what do you want him to be like? Is it specifically a reason why?
So the idea of Perry as mayor, this, I mean, this is really getting in the weeds here, but there was a season 1 episode of the George Reeves series where in one of the cuts, it's not even in every cut, it's a whole thing, but in one of the cuts, there's opening narration where they're dealing with the crime wave in the city. And the narration specifically states that Perry White had been mayor of Metropolis. It's never referenced anywhere else across the series. But
That's
it was
amazing.
And watching that entire series, I kept having that in my head. Like, this guy used to be the mayor. And then Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. There's an alternate reality episode where Perry is running for mayor. Currently in the comics, he's the mayor. So there's this idea. I love him, obviously, behind the desk. That's great. But I don't know. There's something about elevating Perry to that position.
That's fun.
And in this instance, I see it as he's the mayor, and by the end of the film, he'll be behind the desk of the Daily Planet, right? Because
he's on his way out of the office, but there's this big thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, I see Perry ending his mayoral term. I see Bibbo trying to get back into boxing after being in the Navy. This was another one. A number of patrons cited this as well. So, yeah,
there's a demand for this.
I think there could be an appetite for something like this.
There's no coincidence that this is the first, after we've had a few entries now, this is the first overlap we've had. So,
I know. So that's my number 8. Would you say that's your number 7? And then I should jump to my number 7? Okay.
Yep.
Well, I just mentioned George Reeves and the Adventures of Superman series. So my next pick is an adaptation of the unproduced screenplay, Superman and the Secret Planet. Oh. So this was a script written in the 50s for the George Reeves television show. They were going to do a feature film, and obviously it never got made. I do believe it was a budgetary issue.
What seasons was it happening around?
Later in the show's run, I think was the intention. And the basic premise is that Superman discovers this floating asteroid with a colony of Kryptonian survivors, and they end up wanting to conquer Earth. Look, plot-wise, we've seen many different iterations of that in all of the years since, but I still think there's potential here. I do want to give a shout out. And by the way, we covered this on the podcast a few years ago. We have a whole dedicated episode on it. And in that episode, one of the things we talked about is that artist Randy Garrett, he adapted this in comic book form, and it's available at the Adventures Continue website, which is run by Jim Nolt. So there is an unofficial fan-made comic book adaptation of this. Well worth taking a look at. And to the credit of Randy Garrett and Jim Nolt, they collaborated together on a new epilogue where there's this big parade for Superman, and it's populated with all the recurring faces from throughout the show's run. And Superman has to split himself into 2, which he had done in a season 6 episode, so that both Clark and Superman can attend the parade. It ended up being, I think, a really nice coda to that show, and hats off to those guys. But I would still love to see this done. Now, obviously, all of the performers who were originally involved with the show, they're no longer with us. They're not going to be doing the voices, so we'd have to find performers who can emulate those original live action performances.
Yeah, you have to.
But I know that there's the potential out there to do that, and I just think. Look, I'm biased. I've, for the past few years, done a whole side podcast series all about the George Reeves series. As people hear this, we're really nearing the end. We're in our coverage of the 6th and final season. And it is one of those things. I guess this isn't a little bit of an exception to what I said before about really keeping in mind the marketability. It's like, I don't know that there's a large enough contingent of George Reeves fans who would also, a large enough contingent of George Reeves fans, A, and B, enough of them who would actually buy and watch an animated adaptation of The Secret Planet. Sure. I don't know, but it's my wish list. And in my heart of hearts, I would love, that show never got a proper conclusion. Didn't end on a cliffhanger. And there were no, much to my chagrin, there were no ongoing plots, storylines, emotional arcs, none of that.
Right.
Nevertheless, as a fan of that show and of George and the version of Superman he brought to life, I would love to see Superman and the Secret Planet adapted as that final coda and tribute to George Reeves. I know for a lot of people, it's like, Superman started with Christopher Reeve. And yes, that is a seminal moment in Superman history. But let's never forget that for years prior to that, George Reeves and that show, they were carrying the ball. They were the introduction to this character for generations of kids originally, and more so in syndication. So it earns its place in the larger history. And I think this would be really cool. And I think generally I would follow the script, but I guess, and I do also like that parade epilogue that was added, but I think this could also be an opportunity. There's room to flesh things out a little bit. And I think there were certain things never touched upon in the show. For example, we see Clark on the farm in Smallville in the first episode, Superman on Earth, and his father passes away and his mother makes him the costume. And so throughout the rest of the show's run. He never ever mentions Smallville or his mother or goes to visit or anything. So it's like, maybe here, this is an opportunity where we can check in on Ma Kent and Smallville. Even just the fact that this story deals with other Kryptonians, that was something the show never delved into. They establish he's from Krypton. Once in a blue moon, when they do a Kryptonite episode, basically, they'll reference, Superman's from Krypton. But the fact that this would actually open up that other side of things would be great. And then the last thing, though, that I would love to see is an answer to the Superman Lois question. Because the idea of romance is broached so sporadically on that show. The biggest instance is a dream episode where Lois dreams that she marries Superman. But otherwise, the instances of it even coming up are so fleeting. Yeah. And I watched that whole show and I honestly couldn't tell you, not that I'm an expert, but I couldn't tell you like why does he care for her or not? And if he does, well, why exactly are they not together? Like we can read in a lot to it from what we know of Superman generally, but in the context of the show, it's never really articulated. Does he feel like he has a higher calling and he can, or it'd be too dangerous for her? Or maybe she's not his type after all. I don't know. But I would love to see that question really kind of explored and answered, and whether that involves a secret identity reveal, however that plays out, I'm open, but I would want to see that explored. But an adaptation of Superman and the Secret Planet, justice for the George Reeves show, I would love to see it.
I love that. And I'm sensing a theme in your picks so far, just like some things that have kind of left us hanging or left you hanging specifically. We need some closure there. And then also just enriching, taking the aesthetic of something that we love that is so classic, like Adventures of Superman or like the Fleischer cartoon, and imbuing it with kind of 21st century storytelling, just getting that thematic and emotional content in there. That just wasn't like, they weren't thinking about it. They didn't need to think about it. They were like, we just need to crank out these episodes, come up with a zany scenario. Now I think we obviously, and a lot of this has to do with the way Marvel Comics kind of revamped the entire superhero genre, making these characters human, giving them rich, fulfilling secret identities. So much of that we demand now. It's like we need it in our superheroes. So it's kind of like taking those amazing, wonderful classic things and giving it that human interest that was missing. Now, here's a question I have for you. Would the animated film be black and white or in color? Because I think your immediate thought is like, well, it should be in color, but there's a part of me that feels like different shades of black and white, maybe a sepia tone. Like you could play around with a classic look without going full on color and still have it be dynamic and beautiful. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And complicated by the fact that the series itself, half of it was in black and white and half of it was in color.
Right.
I think the sweet spot for me, I'm thinking about Clerks 2, how we open and close in black and white and the rest of the movie is in color. I think something like that, some sort of blend. I don't think I would want it necessarily to be all one or the other. I mean, it's like if I am really thinking about the sales of this, it's like, all right, maybe full on black and white for the whole thing. That might be a tougher sell.
Yes.
So I think a black and white component, I think the majority of it in color, that's perfectly fine. And then that honors both eras of the show. But I think it would be cool. I think about those Batman animated movies in the vein of the Adam West series that they were able to do. And while that didn't speak to me specifically, that's not a part of my Bat fandom, at least not yet. We'll see. But the fact that exists, like, that's awesome. That's really cool. And so to be able to do maybe a George Reeves equivalent of that, and I think really honoring the original show, like my intent isn't, it's gonna be like a dark take on it, but I think keeping the original spirit of the show in mind, but allowing some space to just kind of delve into territory that the show wasn't built for. I think that's the way to go. And I feel like, I don't know, man, out of everything on my list, that's probably the least likely. The fact that we haven't even ever gotten a Superman 55 comic a la Batman 66 or Wonder Woman 77. If we haven't even gotten that, I don't know how likely this is, but I got to put this on the list. So that's I
love it. I love just honoring George Reeves, because I think it is, and even I am guilty of it. It's easy to disregard that show and its accomplishments because Christopher Reeve looms so large, but it was such a major landmark. I think a lot of the popularity of Donner's Superman film there were a lot of baby boomers who were fans of that show growing up who were like, hey, let me take my kids to see this Superman movie. And so it did a lot, and it held the fort down through that decade.
And now, though, as I'm singing the praises of George Reeves and how formative that was for fans, and someone's out there being like, "What about Kirk Allen? God damn it!" All right, I know Kirk Allen.
He'll get a little cameo. He'll be in the movie as well. You'll be able to point him out and see.
As far as lasting impact, George was in people's living rooms for years and years. That goes a long, long way. So credit to Kirk Allen, but George Reeves would really hold up here. All right, so that was my number 7. So what's your number 6?
Let's go ahead and jump into, like, we're bringing closure to these classic interpretations of the character that maybe did not get that sense of finality or that emotional content that we really would have liked. So I am going to, as a absolute massive fan for the Donner film, we've seen the difference. I think here is we've seen the closure with the Donner cut of Superman 2. With Superman Returns, we saw a little bit of closure as well. So it's not as, to me, it's almost like Adventures of Superman. I think even with my love of Donner and Christopher Reeve, I would still say, like, you know what? George Reeves maybe deserves this a little bit more. But I, like many people, would love to see the Donner, Tom Mankiewicz penned Superman 3. So I said Superman 3, the Donner cut. Let's pick off where Superman 2, and I'm actually going to go with the theatrical version because I don't want two versions where the world is turned back twice.
Sure.
Even though it ends with a magic kiss. Let's do Superman 3, the Donner cut. And since we sadly don't have Donner or Mankiewicz anymore, I would say let's get Jeff Johns, who, you know, I think his career started through working with Donner.
Yeah.
They worked together on stories, and I would get Jeff and I would get Mark Waid, because Mark Waid is such a super fan of Donner's film, to write it. We do the Gary Frank art style so that it has that vibe, that Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder. And plot wise, I think, again, we're sensing a theme. I want to see a conclusion to the Clark and Lois story. So in my brain, the magic super kiss is, if it has any lasting effect, it's temporary. We wipe Superman 3 and 4 off the map, and we have Superman 3 really home in on. This is the final chapter in this trilogy, this Donner trilogy, carrying on the Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder love story. I would really want that to be central to the story. And I wouldn't go the Superman Returns route of he leaves and comes back and there's a kid and da-da-da. But I would like to see some version of that. And I think obviously an animated film would be the best way to do it, since sadly, so many of these people have gone. But I also don't know, who do you cast in those roles? Like
Brandon Routh.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Routh would be great. Well, it kind of touches on one of my other choices, not to spoil
Gotcha.
one of my other ones. But yes, Brandon Routh would be great. There are lots of great people who would do a wonderful job. Superman 2 raised the bar in terms of the emotional journey for that character, but I think with 3, we would need to see the conclusion of that. And I would want it to be very centered around their relationship. I wouldn't pull something where suddenly Lana comes in. As much as I love Annette O'Toole, like, she is the absolute ray of sunshine in the actual Superman 3. I don't think I would do that. I think I would home in on their love story and figure out, like, do they end up together? What happens there? Probably have Brainiac as a villain, because I know that was in the conversation for a little while. And I know Donner and Mankiewicz really wanted to explore, like, what would happen if they got married and had kids. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I think I would probably conclude the story with the hint of, I don't know if I would go marriage route. I wonder if I would want to go the, like, well, if this is the conclusion, are we going to definitively say, like, Superman is going to sacrifice himself for saving Metropolis? Like, what would happen there? So not really fleshed out, but I would love to see a Superman 3 in the vein of Donner and Tom Mankiewicz. And obviously there's a caveat here, because we kind of have gotten this as well. And I think Donner has gotten his due 1,000 times over in this day and age. So there is a part of me that's like, yeah, kind of like with the origin story, like doing it again with For All Seasons. Do we really need another origin story? Do we really need another Superman 3 as Donner intended? I don't know, but I'd still love to see whatever that version would be.
No, I hear you. There's a definite pull, I think, even within myself to see something like that. It's interesting, and I like where your head is with really bringing the Superman / Clark and Lois love story to a conclusion. I mean, arguably Superman 2 did that.
Yes.
Depending on which cut, because either way, the upshot is like he can't be with her.
Yeah.
However, and I know we'd be wiping Superman 3 and 4 away, but it's like Superman 3 and 4, he's got other love interests. So it's like they're and I know obviously Donner still wasn't doing them, a ton of reasons why, but it's just like you come out of Superman 2 and it seems pretty clear to me he can't be with anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone human, at least. It's not like, oh, it's a Lois specific. It's not a specific Lois problem. But then there he is romancing Lana Lang, and then the one in Superman 4.
I think it's also like, how faithful am I to this era? Because I think they were also like, I love Donner and Mankiewicz, but it's totally possible like a third film could have been like, like we'll never know. Superman 1 and 2 were like originally written and produced, like that was one film. So it makes sense, like the themes they're speaking to, they do kind of wrap themselves up in a way. Like to your point, it is kind of like, well, that movie kind of states they aren't supposed to be together. So, and then am I thinking of this in an episodic James Bond kind of way? Tom Mankiewicz was a James Bond guy. So it very much is that era. Like we're in the 80s, we're looking at Roger Moore Bond, where it's just very goofy. There's a new woman in every corner waiting for him in each new film. So it's like, do you go that route where it's like, yeah, maybe bring Lana Lang into it, or a completely new character, like, whatever you feel is fit for that era, you could go that route. But there again, we're kind of going the route of like, we want the emotional closure. So for me, it would have to be around Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, and especially with the emotional weight of just they're gone now, Donner's gone now. Like I think it would just feel wrong to try to do something like tossed off or throwaway. I would need it to have the emotional weight that kind of honors what they did for this character and that legacy, and wraps up kind of like with a nice little bow. It's like there's a nice little trilogy you have. You can ignore Superman 3 and 4. If you don't like Superman Returns, you can ignore that. You have this little Donner batch of films here.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, there are probably people listening to this who feel like, oh, we got a conclusion to this version of Superman via Brandon Routh in the Crisis crossover. Different ways to approach it, but I think there's something to what you're talking about. My only question, would you pull anything from the Superman 78 miniseries?
Yeah, I thought about that too, because again, like we have a lot of different versions of what I'm wishing for. So the 78 series, I think it's great. And I think what I really loved about like the Metal Curtain 2 is just kind of bringing in the Cold War more explicitly. So acknowledging, I think it's interesting because Superman, the film Superman 78, is very much a product of its time, but isn't really acknowledging real world events in the way that I think Robert Venditti is. Venditti,
yeah.
Yes. I think that's really cool. I like that idea of tying it into the real world. And I think, the impulse is even with like a Flesh or Golden Age Superman to like, oh, do you start to pull in World War II? And like, are we directly addressing some of the historical events going on? Because you almost, when you're looking back on it, it's easier to do that. Like you don't necessarily want to date Superman by like addressing it directly in the era. You want it to feel like a timeless story. But if we're doing Superman 78 as an animated film, as a comic book series, I give more flexibility and leeway to something like that, where it's like, yeah, why not like have it talk about the Cold War more directly? Why not bring those issues into it? Like what else is going on in the culture and the world? Like, let's do it. Let's talk about that. I think that would be really fun. And maybe that is something else to give it another angle aside from just me being like, I want another Donner movie. Why didn't we get another Donner movie? There's a little bit more of a sell to be like, we could do this as well. But those 78 stories are definitely scratching an itch that it's been very much appreciated.
Yeah. I hope one day we get a third one of those, but
yes,
they're a lot of fun. I mean, there's also floating out there Superman Reborn, the unmade 5th Christopher Reeve film with Brainiac.
Yeah, and I thought about
that
too. I think because it was again, with all due respect, the Salkinds were the ones who
Yes.
made this happen.
Mhm.
Like, and I've met Ilya Salkind. He was so sweet. And like, one of the first things he said to me was like, without Donner, this film. It was a screening of Donner's film with a live orchestra he attended in LA. And he was like, Donner's the reason that this film is so special. And they'd clearly come to terms and made amends with each other. So with all due respect to them, but I think because Superman Reborn was following in the Salkind vein a little bit more, I think I lean more towards, I want Donner. Like Donner was the guy who got it. And that's
I hear you.
probably what I'd prefer. And I haven't read, is that screenplay out there? Cause I haven't read it.
I think the screenplay's out there, but,
okay.
but, actor and producer Dave Kecker he organized a live reading of it.
That's right.
And that's available on YouTube. And I got to speak with him for a little bit. We did an episode on it with Ed Gross and we talked all about it. And it almost made it. It's not on my list, but I did toy with an animated version of Superman Reborn. Ultimately, it was really, really fascinating to see and hear what it would have been. I didn't feel strongly enough where it's like, oh, I have to see this as a cartoon movie, but it's worth checking out. All right. That's a great pick. So my number 6, this one, like the Golden Age pick, an original story, not a direct adaptation of a specific story. I would really love to see a Steel movie, a John Henry Irons animated movie. And like I said, there's no one specific comic book story where I'm like, oh, it should definitely adapt this. But there are a few pieces that I would like to see.
There is a great film that exists starring Shaquille O'Neal that this should definitely take a page or two from.
I as much as you're laughing as you say it, I still do think the bones of that movie are solid.
Yes.
And I would want a voice cameo from Shaq. I don't need him. I don't need him voicing John Henry at this point in time, but I think he could do the voice of the grandfather, because I would love to see one of the early issues of the ongoing Steel series. There's a flashback. I think it's the 0 issue. There's a flashback to John Henry's grandfather telling him the story of the folk hero, John Henry. I feel like Shaq in a vocal cameo as the grandfather would be really cool. And that theme music from the movie, amazing. And I would love, whether it's full on brought back or just a few notes, whatever the case is, I would like to see it represented. But I want John Henry and Natasha and his extended family to get a spotlight. I think the thing that's most important to me is that he's not Iron Man here. I really want him sort of grounded in that more street level hero we first met. I want him forging that armor in front of the furnace. I want him cleaning up the streets.
But not Iron Man, not the Robert Downey Jr. shot.
But I want him cleaning up the streets of the weapons that he designed that now have inadvertently hit the streets and have been used to kill people. Like I said, the family component I think is really strong. I'm cool with him having a headquarters / business. I think the Steelworks is a great angle to play, but more low tech, down and dirty, not a gleaming tower in the sky. The thing that I'm not totally set on is Superman's involvement. Should he be in it? And if so, how much should he be in it? Because I really don't need this to be a Superman and Steel story. And there are different ways to do it. It's like you could open it with the immediate aftermath of the death of Superman, and then the story could just be him, because you thinking about this very specific pocket of time post funeral for a friend when they were introducing these replacement Supermen. But before we got full on into Reign of the Superman and Coast City and all of that, you had like 2 or 3 issues where you were just focused on Steel in the Man of Steel title, and he's developing this armor and he's trying to clean up the streets. So it could exist in that pocket, but expanded. That's one way to go, or it could take place after those events. I don't know. I guess I would want, unlike the movie, I would want the animated movie to reflect that it exists in a universe where there is a Superman.
Yes.
So I want that connection point. I just don't know how much of actual Superman I would want to see.
Well, I think you can get away with them living in the same universe without needing to necessarily have a huge impact. You could touch on, I think, in Superman and Lois, Mannheim talks about how like you're so busy doing the big big heroics, you don't take time out for the little people. I'm looking out for them. Who's looking out for them? You could have that work. Like you could have John Henry Irons, not like, yeah, I think he looks up to Superman, and that's always been that character. And so he could still look up to him, but say like, somebody's got to look, he's busy. Someone's got to do that. And so you could go the Daredevil series route of like street level Daredevil, in the Netflix version of the series, they kind of subtly talk about like, oh, the battle for New York caused all, like, Hell's Kitchen has gone down the tubes again. And, the Disney Plus series, I've seen the first season of Born Again, and I've watched a little bit of season 2, but other than like maybe a couple subtle mentions, and I know Daredevil has appeared in like Spider-Man and She-Hulk and other stuff, but for the most part, it's still very much a self-contained thing. And I think we're living in that world where you could really get away with that. And it's like, yeah, Superman's out there somewhere. And the same way we kind of accept that like Superman lives in the same world as Batman, but Batman has to solve all of the problems of Gotham City and Superman's nowhere to be found. I think you could get away with like, if you focus on the street level stuff and have it do that. And then there's something really exciting to me about like, the armor is always kind of amplified John Henry Irons, his strength, and like protected him. And you have to have something to allow him to carry that hammer around. But if you did want to go the Daredevil route, and this is, again, I'm thinking the live action, this is animated. That's the difference. But like, man, the fight scenes in Daredevil are just untouchable to me. I just love that stunt work, but just like having that same, I guess like he's vulnerable enough where it's like you worry about him in those fights. It's not just like he can go in swinging his hammer, but like he's still just a dude in a suit, and it protects him, but he's still like got to fight these guys, and it's a struggle. I think that's part of what made Daredevil so successful, is just having him feel so human in those fights. It's probably harder to carry that into animation, but I think you could play with that and that street level vibe and get away with it just tonally, like, so that you're not thinking like, where's Superman? Why isn't he stopping this? Like you could have a nice little cameo in there, but I think it would still work if you keep it grounded in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would love to see. I love the character. I've always loved the character, and it would be great to see him get that spotlight. And look, I loved the play that he got in Superman and Lois. That was a very specific take. He's coming from this alternate world. He's got the daughter.
Yeah, talking about Iron Man, like for sure owes a thing or two to Iron Man.
Absolutely. And I do feel like in recent iterations, whether it's, I guess I'm thinking about the Death and Return of Superman animated adaptation, the New 52 comics, I feel like there's been a little bit of short-circuiting John Henry's larger journey. Sometimes there's, he works for Lex, and then he breaks from Lex, and it's like, that's fine. And I think those things, even the animated series, he worked for Lex, it gets you there quickly. But I do kind of like, and I don't know, maybe there is an argument, you would tie him into Lex and the larger Superman mythology. Maybe that is the better way to go. I don't know. But there's a part of me that kind of likes, like, he's had his own path, and there are these other pockets of the DC universe with these weapons manufacturers and the White Rabbit and all these other players. I think to whatever extent you could really kind of carve out a singular space for John Henry that's not so dependent on the rest of the Superman cast, I think would be cool. So I would love to see that. And like I mentioned, there's that great scene from the comic with John Henry's grandfather telling him the story of John Henry, this mythic folk hero. I would want that to be kind of baked into it. And my God, if they could work in John Henry Jr., let's see if I can remember this familial connection from JSA, the Golden Age. What is he? The great grand uncle of John Henry, who's lost in time and then returned. That's probably a bridge too far. But I guess my point is, I think there's enough lore in terms of the Irons family tree and just this larger idea of John Henry, the folk hero, that I would just kind of like to see them play around with that a little bit.
There's rich material there that hasn't been mined. And I think that's what you're touching on. And I think you're right. And I adore the interpretation in Superman and Lois. I know I'm knocking it a little bit for the Iron Man stuff, but I think it's incredible show, great adaptation of that character. But to your point, I think there is room for a street level, like less technologically advanced. Frankly, like what I kind of want them to do with Spider-Man, which hopefully they are doing in this new film.
Yeah.
Make him a little less like Tony Stark Jr. and let's have him be the street level hero. He's building all his own gadgets and doing that stuff himself without all the crazy technology that amplifies him. Like, I want to see John Henry Irons just like from the ground up building this suit and taking on these guys and having to contend with the fact that he doesn't have these insane resources, these insane technological advances. He's just so smart and he knows how to invent this stuff, but he's at a disadvantage because he's going up against people who are more quote unquote powerful than him. But I think that's part of the appeal of the character. And I love the idea, like you're saying, the legend of John Henry, like all that stuff. It just like there's plenty of material there to work with.
Yeah. The last thing, not to repeat myself, but when we did our John Henry focused episode earlier this year, one of the things I was struck by, I talked about this in that episode, looking at so many of these Steel stories over the years, is that from multiple creators, there's this idea that I kept flagging where John Henry as a child or as an adult is being told the story of the folk hero John Henry as this positive, like, look, he beat the machine. And John Henry Irons is like, yeah, but he died in the process. Is that worth it? He died fighting progress. Like these technological advancements continued. He didn't. So I thought that idea of him questioning his namesake, the legend of his namesake, very, very interesting idea. So thematically, there's a few things to play around with. So yeah, I would love, and it's relatively high on my list, just about at the midpoint here. I would love a Steel movie.
I think that would be great.
And at this point, this is where we're going to say to be continued. There's still a lot more to come as Sean and I continue counting down our top 10 most wanted Superman animated movies. Make sure you come back tomorrow for part 2. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.